I could go on a particular diet and absolutely thrive on that diet, and if I put somebody else on that diet, it could be completely detrimental to their health. So don't follow a diet just because somebody told you that they did it and it worked for them. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to be debunking the myth of the best diet. Well, before I start, you guys know the drill. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, ding ding ding. And if you don't want to watch the entire video, I will be including timestamps in the description so you can skip ahead to the section that you want. Now, onto the topic at hand. Oftentimes when a lot of people get introduced to a diet and they immerse themselves in that diet, they become very dogmatic. And according to them, if you listen to them, then they think that that is the best diet that absolutely everybody should be on, and if everyone were to go on it, all of their problems would be solved. And this simply is not the case, because there is no such thing as the best diet. Rather, there's only the right diet at the right time for the right individual. Because we are all biochemically unique, and because we are biochemically unique, we need to be treated as such, because what works for one person may not work for another. I'm going to use myself as an example. A lot of people, they will claim that the vegan diet is the greatest diet in the world. And while that may be true for a small percentage of the population, for the vast majority of the population, any particular diet is not going to be beneficial on a grand scale. And when it comes to the vegan diet, I experimented with myself back in 2015. For those of you that have been following my channel, I've already told the story, so I'm not going to go too long with it, but I'm going to just quickly recap my experience. In January of 2015, I decided that I wanted to try the vegan diet for myself just to see how exactly I would react. And I ended up doing it for 3 months. That was the time limit that I set for myself. And what happened was the first 2 weeks, I felt absolutely phenomenal on it. I noticed that my digestion was really, really good. My energy levels were really good. And then immediately after the first 2 weeks had passed, then my health deteriorated rapidly. What happened was I noticed that there were a few grains that were causing some adverse reactions within my body. I can't remember specifically what the grains were, but I believe it was teff, amaranth, and one other one in that first week. And I had 7 different grains that I would alternate through. They were all gluten-free grains, and I would do one every day of the week, and then on Monday I would just repeat that process. So at the end of the 3rd week, I decided to remove a couple of the grains that were causing an adverse reaction, and then symptoms subsided a little bit, but then what happened was I noticed that it repeated with a couple of the other grains. And so I removed those grains, and then by the end of the 3 months, the only 3 grains that I could really consume without causing me too much distress were millet, buckwheat, and long grain brown rice. So at the end of the 3 months, I immediately removed all of the grains and I swapped from vegan right to the carnivore diet. And what I noticed was when I went from vegan to carnivore, within 3 to 4 days, all of my symptoms completely disappeared. I was getting diarrhea for the last 2.5 months on the vegan diet, and within 3 to 4 days, my stool went back to normal. I was having no issues with digestion, no nausea, no bloating, and I just felt much, much better. So for me personally, the vegan diet was absolutely terrible. But if you speak to somebody who is a proponent of the vegan diet, they will claim that everybody can go on it and everybody will thrive. Same thing with people who are in the carnivore community. For me, the carnivore diet works great. When I'm on it, I have great levels of energy. My digestion is amazing. I don't feel sluggish at all. But there are going to be some people, if they don't produce the adequate amount of certain enzymes, they will not be able to digest meats as well as I digest them. So for me to tell everybody to go on the same diet that I'm on just because it makes me feel amazing would be very, very irresponsible of me, because we each have our own biochemical individuality. Every single individual is going to have slight anatomical and physiological variations, and those variations are going to affect how we respond to our environments. And it's also going to explain why we each have our own nutritional needs to optimize our own health. If we were to take an extreme example like an allergy, let's say we take a peanut allergy. When I was in elementary school, nobody had peanut allergies whatsoever. I remember there was only one girl in my entire school, and our school had about 17 or 1800 kids. Out of 17 or 1800 kids, we had one girl with a peanut allergy. So if somebody were to give me a bunch of peanuts and say, oh, you should eat peanuts because peanuts are really, really good for you and they're really, really healthy, I might be able to consume them without any issues. But if you give them to somebody like that girl in my class, she would have had an anaphylactic reaction, she would have gone into anaphylactic shock, and without her EpiPen, she would have been dead from those peanuts. Now, I realize this is an extreme situation, and the foods generally won't have that type of reaction, but regardless of how extreme that situation is, it does illustrate the point that individuals are going to have different reactions to the same types of food. While not everybody is going to have a life or death experience with certain foods will be more beneficial for certain types of people. Let's take milk for an example. You can take 3 people. One person is going to have an allergy to milk, milk, one person is just going to have some lactose intolerance, and one person can tolerate it perfectly fine. So you have one product, milk, you give it to 3 different people, and you're going to get 3 wildly different reactions. The person with the allergy is going to have some type of anaphylactic shock or some really bad reaction that will require immediate attention. Whereas somebody with, let's say, a lactose intolerance, they may get some upset stomach, maybe some diarrhea, maybe even a little bit of nausea, but it won't be too severe. And then somebody that has absolutely no issues with regard to dairy, they can consume milk without any issue. The same thing would be true for gluten. A lot of people don't do well on gluten. I'm one of those people, but I can still consume it in small amounts if I were to choose to. However, if you are somebody with, let's say, celiac disease, if you have celiac disease, then you have an allergy to gluten and you cannot consume it whatsoever. Someone like me with an intolerance, I can consume it. I might get diarrhea, I might get nauseous, I might even get a little bit of belching, but overall, it's not going to be too detrimental in the short term for me. And then if you take somebody that has absolutely zero issues processing that, they can eat all the bread and cereal that they want, and it's not going to affect them whatsoever. So these different variations in our genes and the way they express themselves are going to dictate the types of diets that's going to be the most beneficial for us. There is no one best diet that the entire population could go on, so people need to stop perpetuating the idea that there is a perfect diet that every single person should be on. Now, one of the other things is our nutritional status. It can influence our expression in our genetic characteristics. Some individuals are going to be prone to certain conditions, but you can mitigate them through proper lifestyle and proper nutritional interventions. This is what is referred to as genetotrophic disease. Genetotrophic disease is a disease that results from genetically determined nutritional and metabolic needs not being met. So if you have somebody that requires a little bit more or less of certain vitamins and minerals, if they're not getting the adequate amount that they need for their specific body, then it will be very harmful to them, which is why the recommended daily allowances are not the best metric to go by, because the recommended daily allowances are meant for healthy individuals who need that amount to not become deficient. But if you are deficient, or if you are somebody that requires a little bit more, these recommended daily allowances are not going to be beneficial. Just like if you have certain conditions, some diets will not be better for you, and you need to avoid certain types of diets. A little while back, I had made a video on stress, and I used the analogy of a bucket, and I'm going to use that analogy again because it applies perfectly to nutritional stressors. When it comes to people and their nutrition, everybody's going to have a certain level that they can tolerate of poor foods. Now, some people are going to be able to tolerate a lot more, some people are going to be able to tolerate a lot less. Some people, they will have a large bucket and they can handle a tremendous amount of stress, and that includes nutritional stress. So if you have somebody where this is their bucket and they can handle a lot of bad food, think of bad food as drops of water going into that bucket. You can pour a ton of drops in this bucket and it's not really going to negatively affect your health as long as you don't allow it to overflow. Think of overflowing bucket as disease. As soon as you put too much, once your body can no longer handle a specific amount, it's going to be different for everybody, then that is when you are going to be in a state of disease. Whereas other people, they have a very, very low tolerance and their bucket is going to be very small. For those types of people, they cannot abuse their bodies as much as some other people. For some of those people, they don't have a very big bucket to work with. Instead, they just have this tiny little glass. So you can only pour a few drops at a time. The way the bucket works, if you were to imagine pouring drops of water in the bucket, if you allow your body time to recover, you allow the water to evaporate from the bucket, you can then put more water into the bucket and it won't overflow. But if you're constantly putting water in the bucket and not giving it time to evaporate, what's going to happen is eventually that bucket is going to overflow, and that is when disease occurs. You can think of that as the analogy to food. If you have a very, very high level of stress tolerance, you may be able to tolerate a lot of bad food. You could probably go your entire life eating very, very poorly, and you could still be able to live a healthy life. And then other people are not so fortunate. Some people, they have just a small amount of bad food, and that small amount of bad food could cause disease in their body. So you have to play around with your body, and you have to know how your body is going to react to these different things. And if you are following a best diet that somebody told you to go on, and it is not right for your body, and you have a very small bucket, which means you can't tolerate a lot of bad food, then for you, it can be very, very detrimental if you go on one of these diets without knowing how exactly it affects your body. But this is one of the best illustrations that I can use about why we each have our own nutritional requirements. And another reason why we have our own nutritional requirements is because when it comes to nutrition and the foods that we eat, our body synthesizes specific enzymes to break down certain macronutrients. And the most commonly known enzymes are going to be lipase, protease, and amylase. Those are the enzymes that help to break down proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. Lipase, if you know from the keyword lipe is fat, so lipase helps to break down fat. Protease, you have protein, protease is going to help to break down protein. And amylase helps to break down and digest carbohydrates. Now, depending on the type of diet that you are following, and depending on how much enzyme activity you have in your body, this will dictate whether or not certain diets are going to be more beneficial. So let's take a look at 3 common diets that are around today that are pretty popular. We have the keto diet, the carnivore diet, and the vegan diet. If we were to take the keto diet or any high-fat diet for that matter and take a look at each individual's lipase production, which is the enzyme that helps to break down fat, then what would happen was we have a couple main types of lipase enzymes in our bodies. We have pancreatic lipase, and then we also have pancreatic lipase-related protein 2. These are going to be the 2 main lipases found in our body, and if you have somebody that does not have these in abundance in their body, let's say they're very deficient in these specific enzymes, then for that type of individual, following a keto diet or a very high-fat diet may not be very beneficial for them, whereas somebody that does have an adequate amount of these enzymes circulating throughout their system, the keto diet or a very high-fat diet in general may be beneficial for that type of person. Now, let's go on to a different type of diet. Let's do the carnivore diet or any high-protein diet for that matter. When it comes to protein, we know that protease is going to be the digestive enzyme that helps to break down protein. With regard to protease, we have 7 broad groups of proteases. We have serine proteases, cysteine proteases, threonine proteases, aspartic proteases, glutamic proteases, metalloproteases, and asparagine peptide lyase. Now, again, if you are deficient in any of those specific enzymes, they each have different characteristics. Well, if you're not producing a lot of that, then somebody on a carnivore diet or a high protein diet, they may not do well on that because they don't have the adequate amount of enzymes to help break down the protein that they're consuming. Whereas for somebody that has an adequate amount of these different proteases, then for them, following a carnivore diet or any type of high protein diet may be beneficial for that type of person because they have the capability to break down the nutrition in the food that they are consuming. Now let's go to a vegan diet. With regard to vegan diet, we know that amylase is the digestive enzyme that helps to break down carbohydrates. So if somebody doesn't have an adequate amount of certain amylases, then they will not do well on something like a vegan diet. When it comes to amylase, we have 2 main types of amylases. There are many more than just that, but I'm going to cover 2. We have alpha amylase and then we have beta amylase. With regard to alpha amylase is the major amylase found in humans, and it's the amylase that helps to break down and digest long-chain saccharides, which is long-chain sugars. Whereas beta amylase is found in things like fungi, bacteria, and also in plants. So let's say somebody does not have an adequate amount of alpha amylase in their body just doesn't produce enough. For somebody that doesn't produce enough, then following something like a vegan diet may not be beneficial for that person because they lack the material necessary to break down and digest the carbohydrates adequately. Whereas somebody that has a high amount of circulating alpha amylase in their body, they'll be able to digest carbohydrates perfectly fine. So consuming a vegan diet may be very beneficial for somebody that has a large amount of alpha amylase enzymes in their body. And those are just a few of the reasons as to why there's no such thing as the best diet. We are all biochemically unique, and we each have our own biochemical individuality, which means we need to consume things that are going to be optimal for our own health. Just because somebody tells you that they followed a specific diet and it worked for them, don't do it just because it worked for them. Because just because it worked for them, it doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. I could go on a particular diet and absolutely thrive on that diet, and if I put somebody else on that diet, it could be completely detrimental to their health. So don't follow a diet just because somebody told you that they did it and it worked for them. Find out what works for you. You want to experiment, see how you react to different types of diets, and you want to find the one that makes you feel your best. But don't follow something just because you heard somebody say that it worked for them, because it may not work for you. You could give it a try, see if it works for you, but at the end of the day, we are all biochemically individual, and because we each have our own biochemical individuality, that means that we are all unique in how we respond to different nutritional stimuli. But that's pretty much it for today's video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to smash that like button so I know to make more of these types of videos in the future. And if you're either new to the channel or haven't subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, as I will be uploading new videos every single day. That's it for today's video. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you again tomorrow.